Welcome back everyone. Time to go ahead and talk about the iPad mini 4 and basically how it holds up in the later part of 2020. Now this iPad originally came out in 2015 and what I can tell you is at that time, this was the last iPad mini we had for a couple of years. So I was actually pretty surprised that Apple kept this specific iPad as their ending of their, iPad mini lineup for a couple of years because, it really wasn't the best iPad. It was okay for the most part, but, we have gotten some evolution with this iPad, and honestly, in my opinion, it has lasted much longer than I was expecting for this specific thing to last. So I do give it a lot of props in that case, but it still doesn't mean it's the perfect iPad for a lot of people. But if you made it last this long, then it's actually a pretty surprising good iPad that came out, I guess, at that time. Now, if you want to pick one of these things up, I honestly don't know if they're still selling them on Amazon, but I'll find the cheapest iPad mini that they're still selling and link it down in the description. It's probably going to be the Mini 5, so you can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. Now, looking at the front of the iPad mini 4, you can see that it has that 7.9-inch IPS panel, which every single iPad mini had that same size screen, except, we've eventually gotten high resolution panels, and this was actually a pretty good panel. It came out the same year and the same time that the iPhone 6s and the 6s Plus came, so think about how far away that was and how recent, this design is still being recycled even with the Mini 5 that just came out last year. So I will tell you, the screen itself isn't bad. It's definitely not the best looking thing anymore, but it's definitely not the ugliest thing, and I think for a lot of people, they're totally going to be okay with an iPad like this. Now, you do have the lightning port on the bottom, and before I even get there, this thing still has the home button on the front. That's pretty cool, right? For some people, that may still be archaic, but at least it has Touch ID and stuff, which is nice. A little bit of bezel on the top and bottom, but that really pretty much covers it on the front. This thing has that lightning port, like I say, and also that headphone jack, which is cool. And on the back, aluminum build, as well as that camera setup. Now, the aluminum feeling is really good. All these iPads, for the most part, still feel exactly the same, and it doesn't feel like a cheap device. It doesn't feel like an ugly device. It doesn't look like an ugly device, and it still looks pretty current because the Mini 5 still looks like this. So there's not really that many changes when it came down to that standpoint. And with that camera on the back, it's a single 8 megapixel sensor. It really wasn't a bad camera. I would kind of say this was the same thing as the iPhone 6 camera, and I kind of said that the Mini 5 had the same exact camera as this one as well. Now, it doesn't have portrait mode, no night mode, no nothing like that. You can't even shoot 1080p at 60 frames as far as I know, only 1080p at 30, but I still think for a lot of people that's totally okay. That is a decent resolution frame rate to film in, and I will tell you, for a lot of people right now, that's totally okay. You're just taking Zoom calls and stuff like that. However, the front camera is only a 1.2 megapixel sensor. Now, megapixels and everything aren't everything, but this thing can only shoot HD videos, not even full HD or 4K or anything like that, so you're pretty much already tapped out in that camera lens. It's not a bad camera, like I stated, for a 2015 phone. It's pretty much the same. It's like a front camera of an iPhone 6 and the back camera of the iPhone 6. Definitely not the best layout ever, and I will tell you, that's probably going to be one of this, iPad's biggest, disgraces, but the fact that it still has a camera, I think, is good enough for a lot of people. So for sure, the fact that it has a camera gets a thumbs up for me in my books. It's definitely not the best. It's definitely not perfect. I wish it was better, but it is what it is. There's nothing we can really do about it. So in terms of the camera setup, that pretty much covers it up. Now, zooming out of that, let's go ahead and talk about the software standpoint. This thing actually came out first of all with iOS 9. Right now, you can get iPadOS 14 on it. Now, if you don't know what that is Apple's brand new version of software as of this point. If you're watching this video 3 years from now, obviously it's going to be different, but the fact that this thing has the same exact software version that the iPad Pro 4th generation that costs over $1,000 right now is pretty insane to me. And it's not even just a price thing that this iPad costs so much less or whatever in the used market, but also the age thing. This is one of the oldest iPads that are supported, at least with that chipset. I think the iPad Air 2 is right there with it, but that's pretty insane in my opinion. The fact that this thing is still supported, I give Apple a lot of props for still continuing to support this thing, and I think body-wise, since it shares so much with the Mini 5, it just kind of makes sense. But that chipset inside of it, I wasn't expecting Apple to keep going with this thing in the iPad Air 2. And basically, software-wise, I think it runs okay. But the fact that this 2015, iPad can still support the newest software is pretty insane in my opinion. So that in and of itself gets a thumbs up for me in my books for sure. Now, performance-wise, this thing has that Apple A8 chip inside of it with 2 gigabytes of RAM on every single model. There were a lot of models of this iPad, but every single one had 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now, what what this basically means is, think about it like this. The iPhone 6, and this is where the biggest controversy, I think, with Apple's a little bit hypocrisy. So with usually Apple's releases software lifecycle updates and stuff with, the chipsets inside. So the Apple A8 chip, same one as the iPhone 6 and so on and so forth. So you could realistically say that the iPhone 6 will last as much as any other iPad or tablet or iPhone that has the Apple A8 chip inside of it. But that's not always the case, because this specific iPad has the same chipset as the iPhone 6, but the iPhone 6 got unsupported years ago, where the iPad mini 4 is still supported. They share the same chipset, but they have different amounts of RAM inside of them. So keep that in mind. You're pretty much getting iPhone 6 performance, but with, twice the amount of RAM, which might sound like a lot. It really isn't. It's pretty much the same performance. It's like right in the middle of an iPhone 6s and an iPhone 6. It's like smack dab. You're getting the RAM of the 6s, but you're getting the chipset of the iPhone 6. So it's definitely not a great performing tablet anymore. I will say though, for like a side iPad, it's really not that bad. I don't think there's a lot to complain about over there. I think it's still fairly smooth for the most part. I think iPadOS 14 has ran pretty fine as well. Again, is it a perfect iPad? Absolutely not. There's a lot of shortcomings with it, a lot of problems. I feel like one big thing is the RAM management. So if you try to split screen multitask, or if you try to, have one app and, swipe into the other and swipe into the other and all that stuff, luckily this thing still supports the swipe gestures, that iOS 4.12 brought or something, but it's still not perfect, and it's not my favorite version of software out there. So right there, that's already one thing to kind of complain about. But I will say, surprisingly, it's not horrible. And if you needed to use this thing as an everyday iPad, depending on your use case, you may be totally okay with it, if I'm being honest. Like, I personally would not love to use this thing, but I think for the time being, it's totally okay. I think a lot of people will probably end up liking it more so than not. And I will tell you, if you are in the middle of, using an iPad, and maybe you would want to get an iPad into your, ecosystem somehow, picking up one of these things for like less than $150 wouldn't be that bad of a choice, I don't think. But obviously, I would probably recommend getting something like an iPad 7th gen or iPad 8th gen, even though it costs a little bit more money. The 7th gen actually may be around the same price in the used market. It's still going to offer you a better experience than this specific iPad that has a super old chipset inside of it. So keep that in mind. I will tell you, performance is okay for a 2015 phone, but it's not okay if Apple were to re-release this thing this day and age with this specific type of specs inside of it. So keep that in mind. That's pretty much how I would kind of go about, writing it that way. Now, battery life wise, this thing has a 5,124 milliamp-hour battery inside of it. Now, what this means is basically it actually has, I think, the same size battery as the iPad mini 5, which is very weird. I don't know why Apple didn't, extend that a little bit further. But with an iPad setup like this, what you're pretty much getting with this type of battery life is okay battery life again. I mean, it's not going to be the best. I feel like the Apple A8 chip wasn't really optimized for it, but I think the biggest problem with this specific battery would probably come in the time of the, battery milliamp hour degradation over time. So what this means is, batteries do degrade over time. You're not getting that full 5124 milliamp hours anymore. You're probably getting like full 5,000 or 4,000, depending on how much the person before used it, if they kept it in hot conditions or super cold conditions, if they just let it die all the time. Things like that can degrade the battery on any device, whether you have an Android, a car, a plane, anything that takes a battery, pretty much the battery life and battery size will degrade. And I feel like you're probably going to experience that, more of a problem than, the battery life dying sooner, or the software not being optimized or something. So iPadOS 14 has been a trip on battery life for sure, but I will tell you, for the battery size and everything, it's not bad. It's about the same as the Mini 5, but I probably would tell you the battery life isn't as great as the newer iPads that have came out since then. So to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and pick up an iPad mini 4 in 2020? What I will tell you is that if you have even a little bit more money to spend, picking up an iPad 7th generation, or even picking up an iPad Pro 10.5 inch, something like that will do you much better in the long run. Those things have way more optimized chipsets. Those things are much newer. And even if it's only like a 1 year or one generation behind or newer, you're going to be getting better chipsets, more RAM, and just a better experience overall. I think the chipset is the bigger problem. I think the RAM, the 2 gigs, most people can probably get away with that. But the chipset with that Apple A8 chip was such a small, improvement from the A7 that it really doesn't even make any sense to even have it. I think the A9 chip onwards were pretty much better in every single way. I will tell you though, however, that this iPad still has some things going for it. I mean, the display isn't horrible. It still looks pretty decent if you ask me. The Touch ID, some people still may like it. You're getting a really good feeling iPad for not a really amazingly, expensive price. So that's another big thing. I mean, it's not like the most expensive thing out there right now. It's fairly cheap for the most part. You're getting cameras on this thing, even though they're not a really good camera setup. You're still getting cameras, which is important. And it's still getting supported with software, which is huge too. So it still has some things going for it. It's not perfect. It gets the job done, but it's not anything I would personally use as a main device. And I probably wouldn't recommend other people using it either. So that's pretty much how I would put it. But the other iPads that are on the market, the brand new iPads, all of them are better than this. Even the 7th gen iPad is better than this. Even the first generation 9.7 inch iPad Pro, I would probably recommend over this. So keep that in mind. That's kind of how I would put it, but that pretty much covers it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much for you guys to hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I'll love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.